I count on the loving help of my darling wife, Camilla.
In front of millions, Camilla smiled until the announcer spoke. One brutal sentence erased her crown and exposed a betrayal she never saw coming. It was supposed to be routine. Another high-profile royal event, another red carpet moment, another round of public adoration for Queen Camilla. She emerged poised and polished, walking beside King Charles with that practiced elegance she had spent years perfecting. The cameras flashed, dignitaries stood, and reporters prepped their notes. Camilla had done this dance 100 times before, but this time, one word would rewrite her entire legacy. As she approached the stage, the announcer, normally polished and unshakable, faltered. He glanced at the card in his hand, hesitated, and then delivered a line that would send shockwaves through the monarchy. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Her Royal Highness, the Duchess of Cornwall. The room froze. There was a moment, a split second when no one reacted. Then gasps, confused clapping, and a flurry of whispers that began in the corners and swelled like a storm. Camilla's face shifted. Her confident expression fractured into disbelief. Her lips twitched, and her eyes darted toward Charles. But the king, too, looked stunned. This wasn't a misstep. This wasn't a slip of the tongue. It was deliberate, precise, brutal. The cameras, ever watchful, captured everything. The crack in Camilla's facade, the flash of betrayal in her eyes, and the silence that followed, louder than any scandal. Within minutes, social media caught fire. News outlets scrambled for confirmation. Royal correspondents whispered of a coup, a power move, something unprecedented in the modern monarchy. Who had ordered it? Why now? And how had it been carried out so publicly? Behind the scenes, palace aides were scrambling. Phone calls surged. Emails flew. Some staffers were visibly shaken. Others avoided eye contact entirely. The royal family, so practiced in maintaining appearances, had just been blindsided on the record and in front of the world. And yet, the deeper question lingered in the minds of the public and palace alike. Was this truly just a procedural change, or the final strike in a silent war? One name echoed louder than the rest in hushed whispers through the corridors of Buckingham Palace: Princess Anne, the enforcer of the crown. The one person Queen Elizabeth II had trusted to uphold the traditions when no one else dared. And if Anne had made her move, it meant only one thing. Camilla had finally crossed a line that couldn't be ignored. But to understand this public humiliation, we must rewind 30 years to a war quietly brewing beneath royal etiquette. For decades, they smiled through gritted teeth. Camilla, the outsider who climbed, and Anne, the daughter who never forgot. But their royal grudge wasn't dead. It was waiting to explode. Princess Anne was born into duty. From her earliest years, she understood the crown wasn't just jewelry and photo ops, it was discipline, sacrifice, and an unspoken code of conduct. While others craved spotlight or sentiment, Anne lived by one rule: the monarchy survives only through tradition. Her loyalty to Queen Elizabeth wasn't just familial, it was sacred. Anne didn't just admire her mother, she mirrored her. She saw Elizabeth as the last line of royal resilience, a living embodiment of everything the crown stood for. So, when Camilla entered the picture, Anne didn't just see a woman entangled in scandal, she saw a threat. Camilla's history with Charles was no secret. Whispers had trailed them for years, long before Diana's tears ever made front-page news. But while the world gasped at the love triangle, Anne seethed in silence. In her eyes, Camilla had disrupted more than a marriage. She had dishonored the institution. This wasn't about love. It was about betrayal. Where Diana had been thrust into the royal circus as a fragile young bride, Camilla had lingered in the shadows, influencing decisions, controlling access, and dismantling traditions from behind. A veil of discretion. Anne watched it all. Every hand-holding photo. Every rehabilitative PR puff piece. Every time Camilla was slowly elevated from mistress to partner, from partner to wife, and finally to consort. And through it all, Anne said nothing publicly. She attended the events. She posed for photos. But her body language spoke volumes. Cold stares, stiff posture, deliberate distance. There were no warm glances exchanged between them, no whispered jokes, no shared affection. What the public mistook as royal restraint was, in truth, a cold war waged behind closed doors, quiet, calculated, and unyielding. To Anne, Camilla embodied everything the modern monarchy shouldn't be: flexible with rules, image-obsessed, emotionally manipulative. Anne despised the idea that the crown could be influenced by tabloids or sentiment. And Camilla had mastered both. Her transformation into a beloved royal figure wasn't earned through service, but through survival of scandal, of public hatred, and of Diana's ghost. That made her dangerous. Because while Anne lived for tradition, Camilla lived for acceptance. And that difference was irreconcilable. Anne wasn't jealous. She wasn't emotional. She was strategic. And as the years passed, she kept a careful distance, refusing to validate Camilla's ascension. She never objected publicly when Queen Elizabeth softened toward Camilla. But she also never forgot what had been sacrificed along the way. Behind the formality and family gatherings, Anne remained the crown's quiet sentinel, watching, waiting, calculating, because she knew one thing with certainty. The day would come when Camilla's rise would threaten more than titles. It would threaten the monarchy's very foundation. That decades-long silence would eventually explode, but not with words. With Huite's protocol, Camilla thought the title of queen sealed her place in history, but to Anne, it was a lie propped up by silence, scandal, and a dying monarch's compromise. When Queen Elizabeth II formally approved Camilla's designation as queen consort, it wasn't a glowing endorsement. It was a concession, a reluctant nod to Charles's unwavering devotion, and a calculated effort to secure continuity in a family fraying at the edges. Behind the polished statement from the palace was a truth that only a few dared speak aloud. The queen had given in, not out of admiration, but out of necessity, and no one understood that better than her daughter, Princess Anne. Anne knew her mother every nuance, every hesitation, every compromise weighed over decades of rule. Elizabeth had spent her life upholding a code that didn't bend for feelings. Camilla, in Anne's eyes, had been the exception that cracked the foundation. A woman who entered the monarchy through the back door of scandal now sat poised to wear its most sacred title. To Anne, that was an unforgivable breach, not because of jealousy, but because it threatened the very essence of royal credibility. To Camilla, the crown was the summit of her painful, brutal climb. She had weathered public hatred, relentless tabloid smear campaigns, and the eternal comparison to Princess Diana. Every headline that once called her the other woman had slowly shifted. Over the years, Camilla transformed from pariah to partner, then from partner to queen-in-waiting. And when the title was finally hers, she saw it not just as a role, but as redemption. The final chapter in a story she'd fought to rewrite. But Anne never accepted that rewrite. In her mind, redemption required more than endurance. It required service, sacrifice, impeccable decorum. Camilla had endured, yes, but Anne saw none of the grace, none of the legacy, none of the reverence that justified the title of queen. Camilla hadn't built the crown, she had inherited it through marriage. After decades of chaos and distraction, that wasn't royalty. That was opportunism. Anne's disdain, once silent, became strategic. After Charles took the throne, her every move was measured. She watched as Camilla leaned further into her new role, adjusting to state protocols, sitting beside the king at events, overseeing patronages with growing confidence. The transformation was complete, or so Camilla believed, but Anne wasn't celebrating. She was calculating. Because for Anne, the moment the crown was placed on Camilla's head wasn't a coronation, it was a warning, a reminder that if tradition could be rewritten for one woman, it could be rewritten for anyone. And the monarchy couldn't afford that. Not now, not after everything. Then came the final straw. Camilla didn't just want the crown. She wanted her family to share it. Camilla wasn't just basking in the crown, she was scheming behind palace doors, rewriting royal bloodlines with the stroke of a pen, and placing her own children on the path to power. For years, she had accepted the sidelines. Her children, Tom Parker Bowles and Laura Lopes, remained comfortably distant from the royal stage, visible, but irrelevant. It was the price she paid for acceptance. The monarchy didn't make room for step relatives, let alone children from a scandalous past. But once the queen consort title was secured, something shifted. Camilla no longer wanted to be tolerated, she wanted to dominate. And her first move was quietly audacious. She began maneuvering her son toward the center of royal authority. It began with whispers, soft suggestions that Tom, with his refined public image and insider access, could be an asset to the royal household. A few informal gatherings turned into regular invitations to high-level briefings. Advisors noted his sudden presence, yet no formal announcement had been made. Camilla's strategy was subtle, never overt, never official. But the implication was undeniable. Her family was no longer content watching from the shadows. Then came the ceremonial shifts. Seating charts were altered, placing Camilla's children closer to the monarch at state functions. Subtle changes, easily dismissed by the public, but impossible to ignore within the palace. Who stood beside? The king? Who entered a room first? Who appeared in official photographs? These were not trivial matters, they were signals of power. And Camilla was sending them loud and clear. The courtiers grew nervous. They had seen the monarchy weather scandals before, but never a quiet coup from within. Palace insiders began leaking. Reports of tension reached the press. Camilla, they said, was reordering precedents. She was elevating her bloodline in a system built to preserve another. And at the center of this unfolding chess game stood Princess Anne, watching it all. Anne understood exactly what was happening. This wasn't modernization, it was infiltration. Camilla was attempting to plant her legacy where it had no roots. Anne viewed this not just as arrogance, but as blasphemy. The royal structure was sacred, codified by generations. Titles were earned, not redistributed like party favors. And yet, Camilla continued, undeterred. The tension escalated with each silent move. A private dinner here, an invitation there, a portrait that placed Camilla's grandchildren beside heirs to the throne. It was calculated chaos. And while the king sought to maintain unity, his silence only emboldened the effort. The crown was being reshaped before anyone had the courage to say it aloud, but one person didn't need to raise her voice. Anne saw the boundary being crossed. And once it was clear, Camilla wasn't just wearing the crown, but using it. Anne made her decision, and Anne, long silent, finally made her move with devastating precision. It wasn't a meeting, it was an ambush. And when Anne entered that room, she didn't ask questions, she delivered the sentence that would tear the monarchy apart. Balmoral Castle, long a place of royal reflection and retreat, became the unlikely setting for one of the most explosive reckonings in modern royal history. When Princess Anne issued a formal summons, not a request, but a directive palace, insiders knew something seismic was about to unfold. Anne did not summon people. She showed up, did her duty, and left. So, when the Princess Royal called for an PTT, urgent meeting at Balmoral, and insisted on the presence of King Charles, Camilla, and a select circle of senior aides, the message was clear. This wasn't a family conversation. This was a reckoning. Charles arrived weary, already stretched thin by the pressures of monarchy and the mounting whispers that something was unraveling beneath his reign. Camilla, ever composed, believed she could reason her way through whatever was coming. She had done it before during the worst days of the Diana fallout, during the scandal-laced headlines, during the painful climb to public acceptance. But this time was different. Anne wasn't operating through whispers or warnings. She came armed with evidence and the iron resolve of a woman who believed the crown was being corrupted from within. The room was quiet. No shouting, no ceremony. Just Anne, cold, methodical, and devastatingly precise. She laid out a binder on the polished wooden table. Emails, notes, internal correspondence, instances where Camilla had crossed lines that were never hers to approach. Unauthorized involvement in royal planning, pushing for precedence shifts, pressuring aides to elevate her children into decision-making roles. Small moves that, when taken together, formed a pattern of power-grabbing dressed in royal protocol. Camilla stared in disbelief. Charles looked stricken. He tried to interrupt, to soften the moment, to appeal to Anne's sense of family. But Anne wasn't moved. She wasn't speaking as his sister. She was speaking as the daughter of Queen Elizabeth. Titi sind out too, and the last protector of the monarchy's sacred boundaries. With calm finality, she announced that, effective immediately, Camilla would no longer be addressed as Queen in any official or ceremonial context unless standing directly beside the king. In every other instance, she would revert to the title Duchess of Cornwall. Camilla's face turned pale. Her jaw tightened, but she said nothing. Charles, desperate, leaned forward and pleaded. "She is my wife, Anne. She is queen." Anne didn't blink. "She may be your wife, Charles," she replied coldly, "but she is not the queen our mother envisioned." Then, with chilling efficiency, she placed a signed directive on the table. Her authority was outlined clearly: Princess Royal, Colonel of the Blues and Royals, senior peer of the realm. The order was official. It was irreversible. She stood, nodded once, and left the room in silence. Within hours, the order was in motion, and the world would soon see the result. She stepped into the spotlight draped in diamonds, but when the host uttered, "Duchess, not Queen," Camilla's world didn't just crack, it collapsed in real time on global television. The Royal Academy fundraising gala was meant to be another moment of triumph. A polished affair filled with noble pageantry, flashing bulbs, and scripted reverence. Camilla arrived with every ounce of royal composure, accompanied by King Charles and cloaked in the confidence of a woman who believed she had finally secured her place atop the monarchy. She had rehearsed her movements, prepared her speech, and rehearsed the smile she would wear through yet another ceremonial evening. What she hadn't rehearsed, for what she hadn't even imagined, was betrayal wrapped in protocol. As the MC stepped forward to deliver her formal introduction, Camilla prepared herself for the usual words. Her Majesty, the Queen. It was a title she had fought for, waited decades to claim. But instead, the phrase that echoed through the chamber sent shivers down every spine in attendance. Her Royal Highness, the Duchess of Cornwall. Gasps filled the room. Camilla blinked, frozen mid-step, as her expression faltered for the first time in years. She turned slightly, eyes darting toward the host, then to Charles, whose face had gone pale. The silence that followed wasn't quiet. It thundered, and within seconds, it was already too late. Every camera in the room had captured the moment. Every phone, every broadcast feed, every journalist present knew this wasn't a blunder. It was a statement, a calculated, ruthless, irreversible statement. Within minutes, social media exploded. "Did they just demote her on stage?" one tweet asked. "She's not queen anymore?" whispered another. Reporters huddled, phones buzzed, and editors scrambled to rewrite headlines. The images went viral. Camilla's stunned face, Charles's conflicted gaze, the words "Duchess again" trending globally. Royal watchers instantly recognized what had just occurred. This wasn't a misstep. It was the execution of a directive. Behind the scenes, palace aides were already bracing for impact. Event programs were reprinted, online press kits adjusted, official titles scrubbed and revised, and all of it had the unmistakable fingerprints of one person, Princess Anne. No statement was made, no explanation given, but within hours it became clear. Anne had pulled the trigger, and this gala was the stage for her power play. Camilla continued through the evening with the practiced grace of a seasoned royal. She delivered her speech. She smiled when expected, but the tremor in her voice was undeniable. Even the finest royal training couldn't hide the shock that had cleaved through her composure. She had come to be celebrated. Instead, she had been stripped. And behind the glamour, Camilla's world came crashing down. The woman once labeled the most hated in Britain just got dethroned again. And this time, she wasn't walking away. She was smashing royal crystal and screaming for revenge. The moment the doors to Clarence House closed behind her, the illusion shattered. Camilla, once composed and calculated, erupted into a fury the palace hadn't witnessed since the darkest days of Diana's dominance in the tabloids. Her voice, typically reserved and media-trained, rose to a thunderous pitch as she demanded answers. Why wasn't she warned? Who had authorized the title change? Who dared humiliate her in front of the entire world? Aides rushed to calm her, but it was no use. Camilla hurled a vase against the marble fireplace, its shards splintering. Like her composure, she sobbed, screamed, cursed the royal machinery she believed she had finally conquered. In her eyes, this wasn't just a mistake, it was a betrayal of the highest order. Her trusted circle stood paralyzed as she pointed fingers, accusing long-serving staff of treason, of siding with the old guard, of conspiring to sabotage her reign. She demanded an internal investigation. She ordered names. She wanted retribution. And most of all, she wanted Anne punished. But even in her storm of rage, the truth was inescapable. This wasn't a leak to the tabloids. This wasn't a slip of a reporter's pen. This was a palace maneuver, clinical, legal, deliberate. Camilla hadn't been undone by scandal. She had been undone by the very protocols she once tried to bend to her will. The very system she tried to remake had closed ranks and exiled her in silence. What cut deeper than anything was Anne's cold execution. No outbursts, no press statements, no arguments, just a signature, a directive, and the quiet force of royal tradition restoring itself. Camilla, who had fought tooth and nail for her crown, now realized she had been playing by the wrong rules all along. In the world Anne inherited from Queen Elizabeth, power didn't shout. It didn't scheme. It waited. And when the time was right, it struck without mercy. The palace staff, though shaken, weren't surprised. Everyone inside those walls knew exactly who was responsible. No one needed to ask. The silence spoke volumes. Camilla's enemies hadn't gossiped or rebelled, they'd simply watched. And when the line was crossed, they responded with the full weight of monarchy's unspoken law. But the real blow came not from Anne, but from the silence of William and Catherine. As Camilla spiraled, Charles was forced into a war he couldn't win, defend his crown, or defend his wife. And one silent message from William shattered what little choice he had left. In the aftermath of Camilla's public unraveling, Charles retreated to the only place he could think his private study, behind. Locked doors, alone. But solitude didn't bring clarity. It brought a flood of memories, of promises made, of decades lost to scandal and damage control, of a love story that never fit inside the monarchy's cold frame. The phone call he placed that evening wasn't just to Anne, it was to the only person left who could stop what had already begun, his sister. Anne answered with the same composure she always carried. There was no rage, no resentment, just resolve. Charles pleaded. He tried logic, then sentiment. He reminded her of Camilla's sacrifices, the years spent absorbing media hatred, the weight she had carried beside him. But Anne didn't flinch. What she saw wasn't sacrifice, it was infiltration. And now, with the monarchy's credibility crumbling and public trust teetering, Anne had chosen duty over sentiment. The siblings didn't raise their voices, but their words cut deep. "You've crossed a line," Charles said. Anne didn't hesitate. "No, Charles," she replied. "You did the moment you crowned her queen." The call ended in silence, not resolution. And just as Charles sat back in defeat, his phone buzzed once more. A message from William. Only one sentence long. "We must protect the crown, not personalities." It was sharp, devastating, and impossible to ignore. It didn't need a follow-up. Charles knew exactly what his son meant, and what he didn't say said even more. William wasn't just stepping forward. He was drawing a line, aligning with Anne, and signaling that the next generation had already chosen its future. That realization crushed Charles. For decades, he had fought to legitimize Camilla, not just in the public's eyes, but within the walls of his own family. Now, that family had moved on without her, without him. He could stand by his wife and ignite a public and internal rebellion, or he could let her fall and preserve what little stability remained. Neither choice was truly his. The monarchy had spoken, and it hadn't done so with force or fury. It had done so through quiet withdrawal. William and Catherine hadn't defended Camilla. They hadn't objected to Anne's strike. Their silence was an answer, a declaration, a pivot. away from the past. Charles, torn between love and legacy, now found himself powerless in the institution he once believed he would finally control. He wasn't the unifier, he wasn't the center, he was the symbol, and even symbols can be sidelined when they lose the family's trust. He didn't issue a rebuttal. He didn't override Anne's order. He did nothing. Because deep down, he understood that Camilla's title was gone. Not stolen, not stripped, but surrendered to protect a throne older than any love story. And just like that, the power shifted not in speeches, but in silence. No press, no parade, just a single brutal move by the Princess Royal one that destroyed Camilla's grip on the throne and restored power to the only bloodline that truly matters. It didn't come with banners or fanfare. There was no televised address, no dramatic, royal decree. And yet, the entire monarchy shifted under the weight of Anne's action. She didn't need to speak loudly, her silence echoed louder than 1,000 cameras. With one signed directive, she did what no tabloid ever could. She restored order, cut through vanity, and reminded the world that the monarchy isn't propped up by personality, it endures through blood, sacrifice, and unshakable discipline. And in doing so, she reminded everyone who the real guardians of the crown were. Camilla, once determined to reframe her story as the triumphant survivor who became queen, had been reduced to a footnote. She didn't fade gracefully. She disappeared by force. Her appearances grew fewer. Her voice, once present in royal campaigns, causes, and committees, fell silent. Her title was gone, but so was something more valuable: her relevance. She had fought so hard to ascend, but never understood that a throne borrowed through politics could never withstand tradition enforced by conviction. Charles, once the crusader for Camilla's legacy, slowly retreated into himself. His speeches grew shorter. His energy waned. Surrounded by a court that had quietly turned its back on Camilla's ambition, the king found himself isolated, not dishonored, but muted. His influence, once central, now shared space with the shadows of Anne's quiet revolution. He had always believed he could modernize the crown through compromise, but compromise came at a cost, and that cost had just been tallied in public view. Meanwhile, the future of the monarchy. William, Kate, George, and Charlotte began to step into the space once clouded by controversy. The public embraced them not just because they were young and charming, but because they represented something the crown desperately needed: stability, legacy, continuity. They didn't seek power. It was given to them not by force, but by the quiet collapse of everything Camilla's reign had tried to engineer. And Anne had made sure there was no confusion about where that torch truly belonged. Inside the palace, aides referred to it as a recalibration. Behind closed doors, it was hailed as a reset. But in reality, what Anne had accomplished was far greater. She didn't just remove a title, she restored the monarchy's moral spine. She did what needed to be done, not for headlines, not for applause, but for history. And with that single word, Duchess, the illusion shattered. But the crown stood stronger than ever. Thanks for watching, and make sure to subscribe, and we will see you in the next one.